Okay. So thank you today for your time, Professor Joseph B Lassiter. Should I call you Professor Joseph or
Just
Professor?
Joe.
Just Joe, Professor Joe.
Joe, no, just Joe is fine.
Okay, so Professor Joe is a Senator John Haynes Professor of Management Practice in Environmental Management, and he focused on one of the world's most pressing problems: developing clean, secure, and carbon neutral supplies of reliable, low cost energy all around the world. Wow, that is the most important thing, yeah, I think, yeah, because nowadays everything is, especially in my country, Indonesia, Jakarta is very polluted.
Absolutely.
Welcome to Dr. Sonia Wibisono YouTube channel. Jangan lupa klik subscribe karena subscribe itu gratis. Klik like, share agar teman-teman bisa dengar juga manfaatnya. Klik lonceng, gambar lonceng, silahkan komentar sebanyak-banyaknya. Yeah, and the energy is really expensive,
Right.
and in a lot of remote island there's no electricity at all.
Right.
Yeah, so it's very expensive to make electricity.
Yeah, the reason that energy is so important is that typically you can take energy and any other resource and make something. And if, for example, you have low-grade iron ore, you can put in more energy and still make steel. So energy is great because it lets you do the things you want to do without always having to hunt for some resource that you've already depleted. And one of the ones that's most important, particularly in cities these days, is clean air.
Yes.
So how can you produce energy that does not have particulates, and then maybe not for you and me, but maybe for your son,
Yeah, for the
someday there's not carbon in the air,
Wow.
so that global warming is lessened.
So let's start from where does it all begin? Where do you start to focus? When did you start to focus in this low cost energy, and what brings you there?
So it was by chance. I had worked in the oil and gas business and in the transportation of crude oil and natural gas when I was young. I was a professor at MIT in the Department of Naval Architecture. I was from the oil and gas industry, meaning my father had been in it, and that's the industry that I began to work in. I got out of that business and went into the electronics business for the bulk of my career. And then about probably 10 years ago, I got interested in energy again, and it was easy to pick up again. You knew the people that were involved. It was the memories of a child. You remember everything.
Because energy, I think, is something that really needed by the world.
Absolutely, and all the data says that people are happiest if they have more and more energy available to them, and they use it to substitute for other things. They buy leisure time with the use of energy. They buy better health with energy. They buy better diets with energy. So the issue is, how can you get people clean energy? How can you get them low-cost energy? And how can you make it available to everybody in both the developing and the developed world?
And now what do you develop for the low-cost energy?
So the areas that's been most interesting to me, I've worked in two areas a lot: solar energy and renewables that are associated with that. And I did a lot of work in that area initially. But for the last 5 years or so, more and more of my time has gone into nuclear energy.
Okay.
Renewables are very attractive, but you need power when the sun doesn't shine and when the wind doesn't blow. And so how do you get people energy 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, available when they need it to do the things they need to do it with? And to do that, you need extremely low-cost, high-availability sources of energy. So I started working on nuclear power and have become convinced that you can build low-cost, safe, reliable nuclear energy if you think about the problem in new and different ways. And that's what I've been working on.
Oh, is it not dangerous?
The answer is no, it's not dangerous at all. The thing you've got to worry about with any source of energy is it has to be managed like an industrial product. But there's no reason to think that nuclear energy is any more dangerous than gas-fired power. It's certainly less dangerous than coal-fired power for everybody who breathes the exhaust of the coal plant. But it's something that can be managed as any modern industrial process can be managed.
So where now do you make the project for this low-cost nuclear power?
So the place we began to look at most closely was the developing world. And the reason we began to look at the developing world is that the people there need power the most. And unless they have a clean source of power, they're going to continue to use coal to get the power that they need.
Yes, because nowadays in my country, Indonesia, like mostly from coal.
Absolutely. And unless you have something that is as cheap as coal, as available as coal, and as secure, safe as coal in the minds of the people in the country, you're not going to beat coal. People will continue to use it. And so we set about saying, how would we develop such power? And what it came back to is we would use a lot of the same techniques that we had studied back when I was young in shipbuilding to automate the manufacture of nuclear power plants. And that we would use some nuclear designs which were simpler than the ones that exist today, which would let you build plants which were safer, that were easier to regulate and were easier to operate so that you could win the support of the people where you were trying to deploy. And we've been looking at places to deploy it all around the world. One of the places that where we've looked hardest is actually in Indonesia.
Oh, where is it? Which city?
The location is up to the Indonesian government. I don't think they've decided where they want it to be.
Okay.
Certainly the initial idea is that you would build a facility that was fairly remote to do the testing of the reactor to prove that it's safe and secure, and to get the information that regulators need in order to safely deploy the plants. And then you move it to where people need power. And again, nowadays you can transmit large amounts of power with transmission lines quite far, quite cheaply. So you can typically locate nuclear plants actually where you have coal plants today, and use the same right-of-ways and the same locations to carry the power to where people need it.
How much does it cost to make one power?
Again, if you're going to sell power in the developing world, you have to do something. It's a man named Vinod Khosla invented a phrase called the Chindia test. And it says, unless you have power that's as cheap as available as, and as supported by the people, as fossil fuels in China and India, you will never get a new source to go. So our objective here is to deliver power that's cost competitive with coal, that's viewed as safe by the people, because even in the most centrally controlled economies in the world, unless people think it's a safe thing, they're not going to let it be there.
Yes.
And then have a plant that you could be confident to install in the developing world so that people could operate it and make the power available to the citizens there.
Now, when that you already being operated in?
Pardon me?
Now, is it already being operated, one of your projects?
No, this will be the first of its kind. And it's interesting to think about the first of a kind thing being done in a developing country. But many first of a kind things get done in developing countries before they get done in developed countries, because the developing countries need the alternative better. They can't afford to wait for things to take place in countries, certainly Indonesia, the fourth largest democracy in the world,
Yes.
is moving on its own time frame. And hopefully our project called Thorcon, and
Forcon?
Thorcon, Thorcon,
Okay.
will be there and be approved for use by the Indonesian government. We've been working with them for about 3 years on this project. And,
So how does it go?
well, I think we're cautiously optimistic. I'll send you to some locations where you can get more data on how the government feels about this. Again, my objective is very, very simple, is that I think unless you give people an alternative, which is better than coal, you're going to have a tremendous price to pay at the moment in polluted air. And in the long run, you'll have a tremendous price to pay from climate change. The worst energy and the most costly energy is no energy. You give people no energy and they die. And we prove that all too often around the world. 2 billion people went to bed last night without access to clean cooking and heating fuels and without access to electricity.
Yes.
And we need to lift the world into modernity. And
Because the coal eventually will finish also, right?
we better leave a lot of coal in the ground. If we burn the coal we know about today, we won't be able to breathe from the pollution point of view,
Yes,
and
yes.
we will fry the planet.
Yeah.
So running out's not going to be the problem. It's
Okay.
living with the waste that's the problem.
Okay.
And you can see that when you look out your window in Delhi or Beijing, or by the way, as you once did when you looked out your window in Pittsburgh or in Dusseldorf. Pollutants, local pollutants, are tremendously costly to an economy. They make people sick today. But increasingly, we have information that the carbon emissions drive global warming, which will drive climate change, which will hit, again, the weakest of our citizens quite hard and in ways which I think are quite unfair.
And how to reduce that by this nuclear power plant?
Yep, this is a way to make power which produces no pollutants, produces no fossil carbon, produces low-cost energy, and can be available all around the world in quantity. A modern industrial shipyard could produce maybe 20 gigawatts a year of power, producing a plant once every year. Right now, people take 5 or 10 years to build a nuclear power plant. If you use shipbuilding techniques, you can get it down to a year. If you use simpler reactors, you can make simpler, less costly power plants and produce low-cost power. And again, you've got to have low-cost power, or otherwise people will burn coal. And you've got to have power that's available at the same quantity and on the same time frame as coal, or they'll burn coal. And you've got to have power that people think is safe, that citizens say, yeah, I want that in my country. You're not going to be able to force people to do this. You're going to have to convince them with data that this is a good way to run an economy.
You already make a model project?
Absolutely. You can see them online.
Online,
Yeah.
in the website.
Yeah.
What's the website name?
That's thorconpower.com.
Okay,
And
okay.
you can actually read there about the Indonesian project.
Is
And I'll
it-
give you an Indonesian contact. You
yeah,
can speak
so you
to.
already make a model in
Yeah.
Indonesia?
Well, no, these are computer models.
Okay.
The physical model and the actual construction of the first of the reactors will probably be done in a shipyard, probably in Korea or Japan,
Okay.
and then the unit would be towed into location someplace in Indonesia where the government felt it could be tested, and it would be fueled and powered up and tested there. And once proven acceptable to Indonesians, regulators, and politicians, it would then be deployed in places where people need the power.
Wow. So can you tell me in a simple way how does it works?
The same way atomic power always works. An atom is fissioned, splits apart, releases energy. That energy heats a fluid, in our particular case, a salt, and a molten salt. That molten salt then transfers the heat to steam. That steam turns a turbine. That turbine turns a generator. That generator generates electricity, and that electricity flows to consumers.
Okay, because from previous we hear that the nuclear is, I think, like for a bomb, right? So is it like
The nuclear power is used for 1,000 things. You're a doctor, right?
yes
You use nuclear imaging.
yes
I mean, we're made out of nuclear material. So
So is it in a safe
well, it's as different as night and day. It's just a different problem. Same atoms are used, but very different use and application.
yes
These are atoms which are used to generate energy to make people prosperous,
yes
and that's the purpose.
yeah, actually it's very nice. It's a
Yeah.
very, so how long have you worked on this?
I've worked on it probably not so much on this general area of low cost, low impact energy for 5, 6, 7 years now,
Oh, okay.
and I'm convinced it's the thing I want to work on in the future.
Yes.
And it's a problem which is common around the world. You need clean energy, meaning no particulates, or the health burden on people, the burden of disease is stunning.
Yes.
And that cost is not apparent today, but in every polluted city, you'll have people die of heart disease and of lung-associated problems
Yes, yes.
because of the particulates. In the long run, you've got to produce energy that does not produce CO2.
Yes.
Otherwise, you will fry the planet.
Yes, yes.
And the impact of that will hit people all around the world in ways which are very difficult to reverse. But you also need cheap energy. You need cheap energy in the developing world so that you can get power to people that will allow them to move into modernity,
Yes.
to improve their diets, to improve the ability for them to take care of their children. All of the things which power allows people. But by the way, the developed world needs low-cost power too. It needs it to reinvigorate stagnant economies.
Mm-hmm.
It needs it to do things like use resources more efficiently. Again, the great thing about low-cost energy, low-cost power, is it lets you do so many different things with the resources that are available to you.
Yes.
And so it's less demanding on the physical world.
Mm.
A coal plant is a huge thing. A nuclear plant that's the equivalent is teeny in comparison. It's a delightfully small problem, and I think one well worth working on.
How about the price? You said it is low cost. Is it really lower cost than coal?
It has to be. If it's not, it will not get used.
Yes.
People will not be able to get over the fact that the price is there. You have to be able to meet the price
How
of
many
coal.
percent less compared to coal?
Well, right now, let's just try to meet it. But 6 cents a kilowatt hour would be a good target price that I think people should move for.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that assumes that the world gives you no credit for no pollutants, and that the world gives you no credit for no CO2.
Mm-hmm.
If people begin to actually enforce tighter pollution rules, or they begin to force reductions in CO2, then the price of nuclear power becomes a much, much, much better deal, because the prices of the alternatives will escalate dramatically.
Yes.
And again, this is something to be used with renewables. It's not necessarily to throw away renewables. But you need power when the sun doesn't shine, and you need
Yes.
power when the wind doesn't blow,
Yes.
and you need power when the monsoon doesn't fill the reservoir to run the hydroelectric plants.
Mm-hmm.
You need power 24/7 by 365.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of power that lets people change their countries and take control over the economic future of their countries.
How about the technician and the supervision of, is there enough human resource to
Absolutely.
do in the developing countries?
Yeah, you have to have reactors which are simple, and simple reactors don't require a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
If there are a lot of people required, it means it's not simple. If it means it's not simple, it means it's more complicated to operate, and you're less certain of how to operate it. These plants can be largely automated and have very small groups of people responsible for running them. They have to be trained, like airplane pilots or aircraft operators have to be trained. But it's no more difficult a problem than that.
But it's okay. I mean, like, it's good and it's safe for the environment, and it has no side effect for all.
Of course, it has side effects. It's a modern industrial process. It's going to take land to build a reactor. By the way, or to house the facility. By the way, 4 or 5 times less than an equivalent coal plant.
Yes.
It produces partially unburned fuel that has to be stored and can be safely stored. And the world has now proven that you can safely store the residual fuels, as the Swedes do and as the Finns do. These are solvable problems if people open their minds to consider something that initially they're uncertain of.
Yes. And how do you plan to make them sure?
We're going to let you do that.
Okay.
You're a
let's do
doctor.
it.
No, you're a doctor.
Okay.
I mean,
So I should research you for your data more.
No, you should look at this. I mean, look at the burden of disease that local pollutants causes in
Of
Jakarta.
course, it's a massive
It's a massive
disease,
problem.
yeah. And we have to use air purifier in all of our rooms at
Absolutely.
home. Yeah.
I mean, but we need to get that stuff out of the air.
Yes, and it's difficult. Is it if we use this new power plant which has no emission of CO2, will it can be gone? The one that is already there.
Well, so that's an interesting problem. Hopefully, what will happen is that you'll be able to use this power and use less of the fossil fuels. Again, if it's economically competitive. But in the end, you got to get people to say, wait a minute, we don't want to breathe this stuff. I don't want to breathe that stuff.
Yes,
I don't want my
yes.
kids to breathe this stuff.
Yes. How to get rid of the one that is still there now?
Well, most of the pollutants that you see, nature takes care of over a couple of year period of time.
Okay. Trees.
Well, trees absorb some of the CO2 and some of the pollutants. Rain washes some of it out and goes in the water. But as long as you burn forests,
Yeah.
as long as you burn coal,
yeah.
as long as you burn petrochemicals,
Okay.
you're going to produce pollutants.
Okay.
And you want to try and do that as little as you need to do it. And one of the safest ways to do it is to stop burning coal for power and use nuclear energy for power.
Okay. So let's do it then.
Yeah, and I think Indonesia has the people that I have talked to from Indonesia are incredibly open-minded about considering different alternatives.
Yes.
There's no reason for a country of 240 million people
Yes.
to not lead on the things it needs in order to secure its own national interests. And I think they're wise to consider nuclear power. Again, it's early in those stages, but I've been very encouraged at how open people are to thinking about the alternative. And by the way, how competent they are at saying these are the problems that have to be solved. Can they be solved? And looking to see the possible solutions and working to try and create something that works. Again, nuclear power's got to be cheaper than coal. It's got to be as available as coal. And it's got to be accepted by the people in the country, or otherwise it won't get to the point.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for
My
your
pleasure.
inspiration today, Professor Joe. Yeah, hopefully we can keep in touch always,
Good.
and I will.
Well, and go look at the
All the data.
forkonpower.com
Yes,
website,
yes.
and there are pictures of everything.
Yes.
And by the way, reports of the various meetings with the people from the Indonesian government that
Yes.
this particular venture is going.
Yes.
But again, I think low-cost power is a dramatically important resource, and increasingly, I think people know that it has to not only be low cost, it must be clean. That means no local pollutants, and ultimately it means no fossil CO2 emissions.
Yes. Okay. So we are going to wait for this new power plant that is going to be the cleanest one, yeah,
Absolutely.
and the safest one and the cheapest one. Thank you so much for your
My
time,
pleasure. Thank you very
Professor.
much, Sonia.